Carlos, now it's time. Come tomorrow morning." I whispered those words into my phone with a steadiness that didn't match the way my heart was shaking inside my chest. I didn't plan to call him. I didn't even think I would ever need him again. But standing there, alone in my son's garage, with the sound of a birthday party still echoing behind the closed door, I knew something inside me had crossed a line I could never step back from. Let me tell you how I got to that moment. Because it didn't start with hatred. It started with a gift, something small, something gentle, and ended with a humiliation so sharp it carved a memory into the room. It was my granddaughter Lily's birthday. She just turned 9. The house smelled like roasted chicken and vanilla buttercream frosting. Pink balloons floated against the ceiling. Children laughed. Parents chatted. I arrived early, as I always do, with a small, neatly wrapped box in my hands, light blue paper, silver ribbon, inside. A silk scarf I had ordered for my daughter-in-law, Emily. I chose it carefully. I matched the color to the dresses she loved posting on Instagram, soft sage greens and ocean blues. I paid extra for the delicate print, done by a woman-owned boutique I'd followed for years. I wanted something that felt thoughtful, intentional, something that said, "I see you. I welcome you. I'm trying." But intention means nothing to someone who has already decided you are beneath them. When it came time to open gifts, everyone gathered around the kitchen island. Kids leaned over. Adults smiled politely. I stood close enough to catch Emily's expression, but far enough not to crowd her. I wanted this to be a warm moment. I truly did. Emily tore the wrapping paper with 2 fingers, as if touching something dirty. The ribbon fell to the floor. She opened the box, looked at the scarf for 2, maybe 3 seconds, then narrowed her eyes. She didn't smile. She didn't thank me. She didn't even pretend. Instead, she balled the scarf in her hand, lifted her arm, and with a flick of her wrist, tossed it into the trash can beside the counter. "Cheap junk," she said loudly, loud enough for every single person in that kitchen to hear. "I don't wear trash." I heard the words. Then I heard nothing at all. The room went silent. So silent you could hear the ice shifting inside the punch bowl. Lily froze mid-laugh. A few parents pretended to check their phones. One woman gasped, but no one said a word. Not even my son, Michael, who stood behind his wife, hands shoved deep in his pockets, staring down at the floor like a scolded schoolboy. I felt heat rise in my cheeks, then drain out just as quickly. It was the kind of humiliation that doesn't shout. It suffocates, the kind that doesn't break you, but hollows you out. I looked at that silk scarf lying in the trash, bright blue against paper plates and cupcake wrappers. Something inside me tightened, then snapped. I didn't cry, I didn't defend myself, I didn't beg. I simply excused myself, walked down the hallway, and slipped into the garage. The moment the door clicked shut, the noise from the party softened into a distant, muffled hum. I could finally breathe, though the air was cold, metallic, and thin. I sat on the step that led back into the kitchen. My hands trembled, not from age, but from the weight of everything I had swallowed for years. Every comment, every eye roll, every joke about me being old-fashioned, every suggestion that I needed to prepare for a nursing home, every time she called me Mom only when she needed something. I stared at my palms, the same hands that raised Michael, the same hands that cooked Sunday dinners, braided hair, signed checks, paid bills, kept the family afloat. And now these hands were shaking because a woman half my age decided to declare in front of half the neighborhood that my love was worthless. I breathed out slowly, and in that breath, something shifted. Not rage, not bitterness. Clarity, crystal, icy clarity. I remembered the small envelope I had tucked away months ago, the accounts Emily didn't know about, the legal updates I never announced, the documents Carlos had helped me revise years back, just in case. I remembered who I was before I spent years trying to be easy, gentle, and likable. I remembered that silence is not peace. Sometimes it is permission. I stood up. My hands stopped trembling. I pulled out my phone, scrolled to a number I hadn't dialed in a long time. Carlos Rivera, my old attorney, a man who once told me, "If you ever need me again, it means someone made a big mistake." I pressed call. He answered on the second ring. My voice came out calm, steady, and colder than I expected. "Carlos, it's time. Come tomorrow morning." He didn't ask why, he only said, "I'll be there." And as I slipped my phone back into my pocket, I knew with absolute certainty Emily thought she had thrown away a scarf. She had no idea she had just thrown away the last piece of my patience. And what was coming next? She would regret it for a very, very long time. The moment I stepped out of the garage and back into the house, the party was still going. Balloons floating, kids chasing each other, parents pretending everything was normal. But nothing felt normal anymore. Not after what had happened. Not after Emily threw my gift away like it was something she scraped off her shoe. I didn't walk all the way in. I stayed by the doorway just inside the shadows, watching how the room rearranged itself after the insult that cut me open. Emily stood there, smiling, chatting, laughing as if she hadn't just humiliated me in the middle of her daughter's birthday. The scarf was still in the trash. I could see a bit of the blue silk peeking out from under a used napkin. Every time someone walked past it, a part of me flinched. The adults were trying to pretend they hadn't witnessed anything ugly. But their eyes tell the truth. They kept drifting toward me, then darting away, embarrassed for me but too cowardly to stand up for me. Silence is a strange kind of violence. Sometimes it hurts worse than the words spoken aloud. Across the room, Michael lifted his head and finally saw me standing there. He hesitated. His mouth opened slightly if he wanted to say something. Then Emily touched his arm, just lightly, and he dropped his gaze again like a puppet whose strings had been tugged. I suddenly realized something painful. My son wasn't silent because he didn't hear the insult. He was silent because he had learned that silence was easier. The music kept playing. Cheery, upbeat, oblivious, the kind of music that didn't match the heaviness sitting on my chest. Kids kept tugging at party hats. Someone lit the candles on the cake. People murmured, moved, adjusted themselves, trying to smooth the moment over like a wrinkle in a tablecloth. But you cannot smooth humiliation. It leaves a crease that never truly disappears. Emily moved toward the trash can, my scarf still there, and dropped another piece of wrapping paper right on top of it. She didn't even glance down, didn't even acknowledge what she had done. That was when something inside me shifted again. Not a snap, a settling. The kind of settling that felt like a stone dropping to the bottom of a still lake. Quiet, final, irreversible. I took a slow step further into the room, enough for the overhead lights to catch my face. Emily looked up and her smile faltered for just a second. She didn't expect me to come back. She expected me to vanish quietly, hurt, humiliated, ashamed. She expected me to stay where she put me. That was the moment I realized the truth. Emily didn't just throw away a scarf. She was testing how easily she could throw me away. And the people around her, her parents, her friends, even my own son, were fine letting that test happen. I lifted my chin and walked toward Lily, who was sitting at the head of the table in her little pink dress. Her eyes were big, unsure, searching my face for answers. Children always know when something is wrong. They feel tension the way trees feel wind. "Grandma?" she whispered. I put my hands on her shoulders gently. "I'm okay, baby. Happy birthday." She smiled, relieved. She didn't understand the adult cruelty swirling around her, and I was determined to keep it that way. Someone dimmed the lights. The candles flickered. Everyone sang the birthday song, their voices shaky at first, then steadier, because people crave normalcy, even at the cost of someone else's dignity. They wanted things to go back to how they were before Emily opened my gift, but they couldn't. Not after what was said, not after what was done. When Lily blew out her candles, people clapped, cheered, and snapped photos. Emily kissed her daughter's forehead and played the role of doting mother perfectly. She was good at performance, very good. Then her eyes slid toward me. There was no guilt, no apology, just triumph. A glint that said, "You won't do a thing." And for most of my life, she would have been right. For most of my life, I would have swallowed the hurt, smiled politely, gone home, and cried in the kitchen where no one could see. But not today. Not after that phone call. Not after the shift inside me. I stepped back from the table and watched the room dance around its own lies. The cake, the balloons, the whispers, everything layered like frosting over a cake that had already spoiled underneath. Emily turned away, dismissing me completely. And that was when the final piece clicked into place. She thought I was powerless. She thought my silence was weakness. She thought age made me easy to push aside. She had no idea that I had already called Carlos. She had no idea that tomorrow morning would open a door she could never close again. And she definitely had no idea that every person who ignored what she did today would soon witness what it looks like when a quiet woman finally stops being quiet. The morning after the party, I woke up before the sun, not because of age, but because memories have a way of shaking you awake long before your alarm does. The house was silent, the kind of silence that presses on your ears. I sat at the edge of my bed, rubbing my hands together, trying to steady myself. I knew Carlos would arrive in a few hours, but before he did, I needed to face something I had spent years avoiding. The truth about how I got here, about how long I had been shrinking myself to keep the peace. So before anything else, I made coffee, sat by the kitchen window, and let the memories come. Slow, heavy, and uninvited. I wasn't always a woman people thought they could walk over. I wasn't always quiet. I wasn't always someone who swallowed disrespect like it was just another pill prescribed for age. I used to have a voice, a strong one. I worked for 32 years as an office administrator at a logistics company in Atlanta. Every number that passed through that office, every contract, every payroll, every scheduling sheet, my hands touched it. I kept entire departments running like clockwork. I wasn't rich, but I was steady. I was respected. People listened when I spoke, and I built a life out of that steadiness. A small house, a garden, a reliable car, a savings account most women my age didn't have. Then I married James. He was the softness I never knew I was allowed to have. A man with a warm voice and a laugh that filled rooms. We built a life, a simple one, but ours. We raised Michael. We paid bills together. We planned for the future. And then, life did what it does sometimes. It took him away too soon. Cancer doesn't care how much someone is loved. It doesn't negotiate. It doesn't pause to consider who will be left picking up the pieces. After James died, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, but like a quiet hairline fracture that spread slowly over time. I lost the person I leaned on, and suddenly the world felt heavier than it ever had before. Michael was in college then. I didn't want to burden him, so I learned to do everything alone. And in learning to do everything alone, I also learned to silence myself. You don't notice when you start shrinking. Not at first. You tell yourself, it's not worth a fight. Let it go. Peace is more important. But peace bought at the cost of your dignity isn't peace. It's debt. And I had been paying that debt for years. The first time Emily visited my home after she and Michael got engaged, she walked in, looked around, and said, "Oh, it's cute." Cute, not warm, not welcoming. Cute, like a child's drawing or a thrift store mug. A word dipped in sugar but sharpened underneath. I laughed it off. I told myself she was young, maybe nervous, maybe trying too hard. But then came the other comments. Small, cutting, subtle. "Do you really still use that kind of phone?" "Mom, maybe you should move somewhere safer, like assisted living? You keep things so old-fashioned." Old-fashioned. Another word people use when they want to call you outdated without saying the quiet part out loud: irrelevant. I heard every tone, every inflection. I felt every ounce of judgment she slipped into her voice. But I smiled anyway. I told myself it didn't matter. Because Michael loved her. Because I didn't want to be that mother-in-law. Because after losing James, I told myself I couldn't lose my son too. So I stayed soft. I stayed agreeable. I stayed small. But smallness is a dangerous habit. Once you practice it long enough, others expect it, demand it, even depend on it. And Emily depended on it more than anyone. I remember one Thanksgiving when she corrected the way I carved the turkey, right out of my hands. Another time, she redid the flower center pieces I made, claiming they were too much and not modern enough. She rolled her eyes at my stories, interrupted my sentences, and dismissed my advice before even hearing it. And every time I thought about speaking up, Michael would glance at me with that pleading look. Please, Mom, not now. So I swallowed it, again and again and again. But nothing prepared me for the day she told Michael, loud enough for me to hear, "Your mom needs boundaries. She clings too much." I wasn't clinging. I was trying to stay part of his life, trying not to be replaced, trying to keep the last piece of family I had left. When Lily was born, for a moment, I thought things would change. Emily was softer then, exhausted, overwhelmed, needy. She let me help. She let me hold the baby, rock her to sleep, and sing to her the way my grandmother once sang to me. For a while, we were almost a family. But as soon as Emily regained control, the walls went back up, higher, sharper, colder. She told people I was too attached, that I overstepped, that I needed things to feel important. People believe the woman who speaks first. They always do. So the story became hers, and I became the villain in it, until the birthday party, until the scarf, until she humiliated me so loudly no one could pretend not to hear it. As I sat in my quiet kitchen, sipping lukewarm coffee, I finally understood. This wasn't about a gift. It wasn't about a scarf. It wasn't even about disrespect. This was years of letting myself become small so that others could feel big. This was the final straw tugging at a thread that had been unraveling for a decade. And when a woman who has been silent for too long finally reaches her breaking point, she doesn't raise her voice. She rises. I set my coffee down. Carlos would be here soon, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt ready. That night, after the party, after the humiliation, after the long drive home in silence, I walked into a house that felt heavier than it ever had before. The moment I shut the door behind me, the weight of the day fell straight onto my shoulders. I didn't turn on the lights right away. I just stood there, keys in my hand, heart bruised, breath unsteady, trying to understand how a day meant to celebrate a child's life had ended with me feeling like mine was shrinking. I placed my purse on the counter and finally turned on the lamp in the living room. The soft yellow glow filled the space, touching the photos on the wall. My wedding picture with James, a framed kindergarten drawing from Michael, a few snapshots of baby Lily, a timeline of love, a timeline of everything I had given, a timeline of everything they had forgotten. I sank into the sofa, the same one James and I picked out 20 years ago. The cushion dipped softly beneath me, familiar and comforting, but tonight it felt different, too big, too empty. My throat tightened. For the first time all day, the tears came. They weren't loud tears, not the kind you sob into a pillow. These were the quiet ones, the kind that slide down your face slowly, painfully, because they're carrying years of held breath, swallowed words, and memories you never wanted to examine too closely. I leaned forward and buried my face in my hands. What did I do wrong? The question came out as a whisper, fragile, trembling, honest in a way I hadn't allowed myself to be in years. Was I too soft? Too forgiving? Too eager to keep the peace? Too afraid to lose what little family I had left? Or was I simply too lonely? Because loneliness has a way of convincing you that you must tolerate anything just to stay connected, even disrespect, even cruelty, even being made to feel like you're a burden. I thought about the scarf, crumpled, thrown away, dismissed with 2 words that clung to my skin like frost, cheap, junk. I knew Emily meant more than just the scarf. The target was me, my presence, my existence, my role in that family, my place in my son's life, and that realization carved a new kind of ache inside me, one that made my bones feel older than 64. I wiped my face and looked around the room again. The walls, once warm, now felt like they were closing in. I thought of all the Sunday dinners I used to cook, all the holidays I decorated for, all the quiet mornings James and I spent at this very table talking about nothing and everything. I missed him so intensely in that moment it felt like a punch to the chest. If he were here, none of this would be happening. Or maybe it would, but at least I wouldn't be fighting it alone. "I'm tired, James," I whispered toward the empty chair across from me. So tired. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, reminding me that time moves forward, whether your heart is ready or not. The house was silent except for that ticking, and it echoed the truth I had avoided for far too long. I'd been living like a ghost in my own life, a visitor in my son's home, a shadow in my granddaughter's world, an inconvenience in my daughter-in-law's eyes, and suddenly another question rose in me, sharper, clearer, colder. When did I start buying love? Was it when I started babysitting every weekend without being asked? When I paid for their first apartment deposit because they said they were a little short? When I covered Emily's medical bills after her surgery because she told Michael I was just helping out? When I offered to help with Lily's preschool tuition? When I stayed quiet, silence as currency so they wouldn't push me away? I pressed a hand to my chest. It hurt, not from age, not from illness, from truth, because I had spent years giving, hoping the giving would earn me a place. But love given as a transaction becomes something else entirely. It becomes an obligation, it becomes an expectation, it becomes invisible. I stood up slowly, walked toward the hallway mirror, and stared at my reflection. My eyes were red, my cheeks wet, but my posture was straight, tired but straight. There is a specific moment in every woman's life when grief shifts into resolve, a moment when something inside you refuses to bend any further, a moment when dignity becomes louder than fear. I was standing in that moment. I reached out and touched the mirror with my fingertips, studying the woman staring back. A woman who had survived loss, loneliness, aging, judgment, and now humiliation. And beneath the sadness in her eyes, there was something else. A spark. Small but real. A spark of someone remembering who she used to be. I straightened my shoulders, wiped the last tear from my cheek, took a deep breath, not the shaky kind I had taken earlier, but a full one. For the first time all night, my heart stopped trembling. Tomorrow would come. Carlos would come. And I would no longer face this alone. I turned off the living room light and walked down the hallway toward my bedroom. As I reached for the switch, I caught one last glimpse of myself in the mirror, tired, hurting, but upright. A woman standing at the edge of a transformation she didn't ask for, but it was finally ready to claim. The room fell into darkness, and with it the last remnants of the woman I had forced myself to be. Quiet, forgiving, small. By morning, she would be gone, and the woman who took her place would be one Emily never saw coming. Morning arrived without mercy. I didn't sleep much, but strangely, I didn't feel tired. It was as if all the exhaustion from the night before had settled into a single, solid decision sitting quietly in my chest. The kind of decision that doesn't scream. It simply exists, clear and immovable. By the time the clock hit 8, I was already dressed, coffee made, and every document I'd collected over the years spread neatly across the dining table. Bank statements, old insurance forms, property deeds, medical records, receipts from times I had helped out, things I'd kept without knowing why, until now. When Carlos knocked, I opened the door before he could lower his hand. His eyes scanned my face for a moment. "Rough night?" he asked gently. I stepped aside to let him in. "You could say that." Carlos had always been a man of quiet power, the kind of presence that fills a room without raising a voice. He took off his coat, set his briefcase down, and looked over the papers I'd laid out. "You kept everything," he said. "I didn't know I'd need them," I replied. "But I did." He nodded, then sat. "Tell me what happened yesterday." I told him. Every detail, every word, every look, the scarf, the trash can, the silence, the humiliation, the glint in Emily's eyes that told me none of this was a mistake. When I finished, Carlos leaned back, steepling his fingers. "This wasn't about a gift," he said. "This was a stress test." "A what?" I asked. "A test to see how far they can push you. They want control, and humiliation is one of the fastest ways to weaken someone's confidence. They want you to doubt yourself, your stability, your place. Once you start doubting, they can justify taking over." "Taking over what?" He gave a slow, knowing look. "Everything." The word hit me harder than Emily's insult had. I swallowed. "Then we start today." Carlos nodded. "We start by cutting off every access point, every dependency, every door they think they can walk through." For the first time that morning, my spine straightened. We went through every document, every account, every arrangement I'd allowed over the years out of kindness, trust, or fatigue. I hadn't realized how many little doors I'd left open. Automatic payments set up for Michael and Emily's apartment during their first year of marriage, a joint utility bill I'd forgotten to remove myself from, the 529 plan I contributed to for Lily but never protected legally, spare keys Emily insisted on having in case of emergencies, a small loan repayment I had quietly paused because they were having a hard month. I had wanted to help, but help without boundaries becomes fuel for entitlement. Carlos placed a folder in front of me. "Here's what we're going to do." Step by step, we began making changes. First, we contacted the bank. I removed Michael's secondary access from an account he hadn't used in years, but somehow never relinquished. We placed a fraud alert. We froze a line of credit Emily had once hinted she might borrow from if things ever got tight. Then we changed every password, every login, every recovery email. I didn't realize until then how many passwords I'd let Michael handle because he insisted technology was easier for younger people. Carlos caught my hesitation. "You're not taking anything from them. You're reclaiming what's yours." Next, we drafted letters. One revoking Emily's access to my home. One notifying their landlord that I was no longer financially responsible for a single document connected to their address. One to remove Michael's name from my car insurance. One to update my will, removing both Michael and Emily temporarily until we knew exactly how deep the manipulation ran. I felt my chest tighten as we typed that last part. Carlos noticed. "Temporary," he reminded me. "This isn't punishment, this is protection." Still, it stung. Not because I didn't want to do it, but because I never imagined I'd have to. When it was all written, I signed each page. The sound of my pen moving across paper felt like the slow but undeniable tightening of a lock. One click at a time. Every signature meant something. It meant, "I see what you're trying to do. I'm not asleep anymore. You don't get to control me. Not now. Not ever again." After the last signature, I exhaled, surprised by the weight that left my body. Carlos closed the folder. "That's phase 1. There's more?" He gave a firm nod. "Emily is smart, manipulative, strategic. People like that don't stop just because you say so. They escalate. Which means we have to be ahead of her, not just equal." I leaned back in my chair, absorbing that truth. I thought of Emily's smile at the party, sweet on the surface, sharp just underneath. The kind of smile that says, I already won. But she hadn't. She only thought she had because I had stayed silent for too long. Carlos packed up his briefcase. Next phase will come soon, and it won't be pretty. She's going to panic when she realizes she lost access. She'll twist the story, make you the villain, paint you as unstable, emotional, forgetful. Maybe worse. I know, I said quietly. Are you ready for that? I looked toward the kitchen doorway, where the morning sun hit the floor in a soft patch of gold. For years, I'd let that light fall on a version of me who was too afraid to stand up, too afraid to rock the boat, too afraid to lose the last pieces of family I had. But fear had gotten me nowhere. I'm ready, I said finally. Carlos smiled, not proudly, but knowingly. Good, because this is the first time you've chosen yourself in a very long time. He walked toward the door, then paused. And Martha? Yes, this is only the beginning. After he left, the house felt different. Not lighter, not heavier, just clearer. Like the fog that had been settling over my life for years had finally started to lift. And as I stood there in the quiet stillness of my home, I realized something simple and astonishing. For the first time in a long, long while. I wasn't afraid of tomorrow. I was waiting for it. Emily's panic didn't arrive slowly. It hit like a storm, breaking all at once. It started the next morning, less than 24 hours after I cut every line of access. I had just finished making tea when my phone lit up with Michael's name. He rarely called this early. For a brief second, the mother in me worried something had happened to Lily. But the moment I answered, I knew this call wasn't about my granddaughter. "Mom," he said sharply without a greeting. "Why did the bank call me?" I stirred my tea slowly. What did they say? They said your accounts were updated, that I'm no longer listed anywhere, that some of the passwords didn't work when I tried to check something for you. His voice tightened. Mom, what's going on? The old version of me would have softened, explained, apologized for the inconvenience, but that woman was gone. I updated my information, I said simply. Why? Because it was time. Silence crackled on the line. Then, with a voice I recognized all too well, one shaped by someone else's hands, he said, Emily thinks you're acting irrational. She's worried. There it was, the first shot fired. I breathed out slowly. Michael, you don't need to worry about me. She said you've been forgetful. I am not forgetful. And moody lately. I am not moody. And we're concerned, you're isolating. I closed my eyes. I could see it so clearly. Emily pacing their kitchen, feeding him each line, planting each doubt, shaping the narrative like a sculptor working with clay. She wanted him to believe I wasn't stable. She needed him to believe it. Because if I was unstable, she could take control. Michael, I said quietly, your wife is trying to make you doubt me. He didn't respond to that. Instead, he exhaled sharply. Mom, why didn't you tell us you were changing things? Because every time I tried to tell you something serious, Emily stepped between us. Because silence became the only language you seemed willing to hear. Because I didn't know how to protect myself without losing you, but I didn't say any of that. I made decisions for my own well-being, I said, and that's all you need to know. He huffed in frustration. Emily wants to come by this afternoon to talk. We're bringing Lily. That wasn't a request. It was a warning. After he hung up, the house felt suddenly colder. I set my tea down, unable to drink it anymore. Emily wasn't wasting a second. She could sense power slipping through her fingers, and people like her don't lose power quietly. They fight. They claw. They manipulate harder. But the calm that settled inside me wasn't fear. It was certainty. She was coming. Good. It was time she saw who she was dealing with. By 2 o'clock, their car pulled into my driveway. I watched through the window as Emily got out, her steps quick, her posture sharp, her mouth already tight with annoyance. Michael got Lily out of the car gently, holding her hand as they walked up the path. When I opened the door, Emily marched in without waiting for an invitation, scanning the house like she expected to find me rocking in a corner, talking to ghosts. Michael followed, uncertain. Lily ran to hug my waist, her small hands warm against my skin. "Hi, Grandma," she chirped. I held her close. "Hi, baby." Emily cleared her throat loudly. "We need to talk." I nodded. "Then talk." She crossed her arms. "You've been making changes behind our backs. Important changes. And it's scaring Michael." Michael looked away, not confirming it, not denying it. I moved slowly to the armchair and sat. "What exactly is scaring him?" Emily stepped forward. "You're not thinking clearly." "I'm thinking perfectly clearly. You're pushing us away." "I'm setting boundaries." She blinked, caught off guard. She wasn't expecting directness. She was expecting the quiet, apologetic woman she could twist like warm wax. "I just want to understand," she said, shifting tactics. "Why change the accounts? Why freeze access? Why now?" "Because it was necessary." "To protect yourself from what?" she demanded. I met her eyes. "From you." Michael's head shot up. "Mom!" Emily laughed, not kindly but mockingly. "From me? What have I ever done to you?" The scarf flashed across my mind. The trash can. The years of small cuts disguised as comments, the entitlement, the control, the manufactured concern. "You humiliated me in front of my family," I said evenly, "and you've been undermining me for years. That stops today." Emily took a step closer, her voice tightening. "We're just worried about your mental state." There it was, her real move, the path she wanted to take. She wanted to paint me as unstable, confused, incompetent, old, so she could justify control, financial control, legal control, complete control. I smiled, slowly, deliberately. "Emily, if you were truly concerned about my mental state, you wouldn't have thrown my gift in the trash and called it junk." Her cheeks twitched, but she didn't break. I was frustrated. "You were cruel. It was a joke." "It wasn't." She opened her mouth again, but I held up a hand. "No more excuses. No more comments. No more insults hidden behind concern. You don't get to talk to me like that again." Michael stepped forward. "Mom, Emily is just trying to—" "No," I said firmly. "She's not trying to help me. She's trying to manage me." The silence that followed was thick and uncomfortable. Emily finally spoke, voice cold. "So what now? You just cut us off?" "I cut off the access you never should have had." "And your will?" she asked, tension rising. "Did you change that too?" Ah, there it was, the real fear. I didn't answer. I didn't need to. Emily's face paled. Michael swallowed awkwardly, torn between loyalty and realization. And Lily, sweet Lily, sat on the couch drawing with crayons, unaware that the balance of her entire family had just shifted. I stood slowly. "You came here expecting to scare me," I said softly. "But the truth is, Emily, I'm not afraid of you anymore." Her jaw tightened. "You're making a mistake." I shook my head. "No, dear, I finally stopped making them." Emily stared at me, stunned. Michael looked at me, confused. Lily hummed quietly, coloring. And for the first time in years, I felt tall. After Emily and Michael left, the house settled into a silence that felt different from the night before. Not empty, not cold, just honest. Everything that needed to be said had finally been spoken aloud, and the air seemed to exhale with me. I stood near the window for a long moment, watching their car pull away, wondering if Michael looked back even once. I didn't check. Some truths are better left unseen. When the driveway was empty again, I finally let my body relax. My hands rested on the edge of the table, steady in a way they hadn't been for years. It was strange how something as simple as standing up for yourself could stitch together parts of you that had been unraveling quietly in the background of your life. Yet I could still feel a trembling under the surface, an old habit trying to return, whispering that perhaps I'd gone too far, that perhaps I should have softened the blow. But before those doubts could grow roots, there was a knock on the door. It wasn't hesitant or frantic. It was steady, measured, like the person on the other side already knew I would answer. When I opened the door, there stood Mrs. Evans, my next-door neighbor. 72 years old, short white curls, sharp eyes, and one of the few people who had always treated me as more than just a mother-in-law, a grandmother, or a widow. "I saw them leave," she said simply, her voice warm but direct, "and I saw your shoulders drop after they pulled out." I stepped aside to let her in without a word. She walked into my kitchen like she'd been doing it for years, which, in truth, she had. She sat down at the table and motioned for me to do the same. "Tea?" I nodded, grateful for the familiarity of her presence. As I filled the kettle, she studied my face with the kind of attentiveness only older women possess, the kind that comes from surviving, observing, and understanding heartbreak in its many shapes. When the water boiled, I poured us both a cup and finally sat. Mrs. Evans didn't ask what happened. She didn't need to. She had been at the birthday party yesterday. She had seen everything: the scarf, the trash can, the aching silence that followed. "I came because I didn't like how you walked out yesterday," she said softly. "You didn't leave like a wronged woman. You left like someone who'd been carrying a weight for far too long." I swallowed hard, the truth of her words pressing against the back of my throat. "I'm tired," I admitted. So tired of giving people the benefit of the doubt. So tired of accepting treatment I never deserved. Mrs. Evans reached across the table and touched my hand gently. "Honey, tired is what happens when you've been strong alone for too many years." Her words slid into a part of me I didn't know was still open, and somehow they settled there like a balm. She took a sip of tea, then continued. "You know, women like us. We learned to speak softly because the world told us it preferred us that way. But being soft isn't the same as staying silent, and staying silent isn't the same as being weak." I nodded slowly, letting each sentence land. "I called Carlos yesterday," I said, my voice steady. "I made changes, real ones." Her eyes brightened with approval. "Good. About time you stopped letting that girl treat your kindness like a doormat." There was no judgment in her tone, just truth delivered with compassion. "I thought standing up to them would make me feel worse," I admitted, like I was losing the last pieces of my family. "And do you?" she asked gently. I shook my head. "I feel clearer, like I finally used my own voice again." She leaned back, satisfied. "Then you didn't lose anything. You reclaimed something." For a long while, we simply sat there, letting the meaning of her words settle around us. My home, which had felt suffocating last night, now felt grounded, like the walls themselves were relieved to no longer hold every unspoken thing. Mrs. Evans eventually set her cup down. "Before I forget," she said, reaching into her purse, "I have something for you." She pulled out a small notebook, its cover a soft brown leather worn smooth with age. "This belonged to my sister," she explained. "She used it whenever life felt too loud to hold alone. She wrote down everything. What hurt, what healed, what she hoped for. When she passed, she left it to me, told me to give it to the next woman who needed a place to put her pain." She slid it across the table. My throat tightened. "I don't know what to say." "You don't have to say anything, but I want you to have it. What you're going through, it's not just a moment, it's a shift. And shifts need space. Words on paper help you make sense of the noise." I ran my fingers over the smooth cover. It felt warm, as if it had held stories for years and was ready for more. "Thank you," I whispered. She smiled. Use it. As she stood to leave, she paused at the door, turning back to me with the kind of gaze that strips down every defense. And Martha? What Emily is doing? It has a name. A name? I repeated softly. Financial manipulation, emotional erosion, control disguised as concern, and the longer it goes unnamed, the more dangerous it becomes. The words settled into place like puzzle pieces, because hearing the truth spoken out loud by someone who wasn't trying to twist it, soften it, or deny it, made everything suddenly align. Mrs. Evans stepped outside and gave my arm a gentle squeeze. You're not alone, honey, not anymore. When she left, I closed the door slowly and stood in the quiet hallway, notebook pressed to my chest. The kettle still faintly clicked as it cooled, and dust danced lazily in the soft afternoon light. For the first time in a very long time, my home didn't feel like a place I retreated to. It felt like a place I was returning to. I walked to the dining table, opened the notebook, and wrote the first sentence in a new chapter of my life. Not shaky, not rushed, but firm. This ends now. And as the ink dried, I knew naming my pain was the first step in destroying its power. The rest of the afternoon passed in a slow, deliberate rhythm. I cleaned the kitchen, folded laundry, watered my plants, ordinary things, grounding things. Yet beneath each quiet action was a steady hum, like a drumbeat growing somewhere deep in the earth, the kind of sound you feel before you ever hear it. Something was coming. Mrs. Evans sensed it. Carlos warned me about it, and deep down, I already knew. When people like Emily lose control, they don't walk away. They escalate. It began with a single knock, not sharp, not frantic, official. I opened the door to find a woman standing there holding a clipboard, her tone polite but firm. Good afternoon, ma'am. I'm with Adult Protective Services. We received a call expressing concern about your well-being. For a moment, the world seemed to slow around me. The clipboard, the badge, the rehearsed concern. It all snapped into place like a lock turning. Emily. Of course, it was Emily. I stepped aside, keeping my face calm. Come in. The woman entered, eyes scanning the living room, not rudely, but professionally. She was doing her job. I didn't fault her for that. What hurt wasn't her presence. It was the lie that brought her here. May I ask a few questions? She said gently. Of course. She sat across from me, crossing her legs, her voice soft. We received a report that you've been confused lately, forgetting important things, struggling with day-to-day tasks, and isolating yourself. Each accusation landed with a thud. Words Emily had planted earlier that morning, now sprouting into a full-grown attempt to dismantle my independence. I folded my hands in my lap. Do I seem confused to you? She hesitated, caught off guard. No, not at all. Does my home look neglected? She glanced around, everything clean, tidy, intentional. No. Do I seem unable to care for myself? No, she admitted quietly. I held her gaze steadily. Then your report is incorrect. She shifted in her seat, uncomfortable with the obvious truth. Sometimes loved ones misunderstand situations. I'm only required to verify your safety. I understand, I said calmly, and I appreciate you doing your job, but someone is using your department as a weapon. She exhaled. It happens more often than you'd think. Something softened in her expression, not pity, but recognition. She stood, closing her folder. I'll mark this as unfounded. You're clearly capable, coherent, and stable. You have nothing to worry about. Thank you, I said sincerely. As she walked to the door, she paused. If the person who filed this tries again, call us directly. False reports are taken seriously. I will. After she left, I closed the door slowly, letting my hand rest on the wood for a long moment. My heart didn't pound in fear. It burned in clarity. Emily had made her move. She had tried to paint me as unfit, unstable, and unable to make decisions. A woman who couldn't be trusted with her own life. And the worst part? She thought she had done it cleverly. But the universe has perfect timing. Just as I stepped back into the kitchen, my phone buzzed. It was a text from Carlos. "Be ready, I'm coming back. They'll escalate soon." I typed back, "They already did." He replied instantly, "I'm 5 minutes away." True to his word, he arrived moments later. His face tightened the second I told him what happened. "That wasn't just escalation," he said. "That was a strategy. She's laying groundwork." "For what?" I asked quietly. "For a competency challenge." The air felt heavier, thicker, as if the walls themselves understood the gravity of what he was saying. "She wants to prove you're not capable of making decisions. If she can convince the right people, she can petition the court for guardianship. Full control." My stomach clenched, not from fear, but from the realization of just how far she was willing to go. "She won't get that," I said firmly. "No, she won't," Carlos agreed. "Not if we go first." He laid out the plan, not rushed, not dramatic, just methodical and crisp, the way only someone who has seen these battles before can do. "You need an independent medical evaluation," he explained, "a clean bill of mental competence, a full cognitive assessment, not because you need it, but because she'll challenge you without hesitation." I nodded. "I'll do it." "Then we gather statements," he continued. "People who know you, people who've seen you functioning normally, friends, neighbors." I thought of Mrs. Evans, her steady eyes and unwavering kindness. "I have someone." "Good. The more credible witnesses, the better. Emily is building a narrative. We build the truth." His confidence steadied me. I wasn't alone anymore. This wasn't just my fight. Carlos gathered the documents we needed and placed them into a new folder, thick, heavy, undeniable. "This is our shield," he said. "Next, we prepare our sword." "Sword?" I repeated softly. He nodded. "Emily's finances, her debts, her history of manipulation, her attempts at financial exploitation, everything she doesn't want revealed." I felt a quiet strength rise inside me, calm, steady, rooted. "She thinks she knows everything about me. She thinks I'm predictable." Carlos smiled faintly. "Then let's surprise her." We spent the next hour planning the steps, calls to make, appointments to schedule, documents to gather. Every piece is a part of a larger picture. When he finally stood to leave, the sun had dipped lower, casting long, warm stripes across my living room floor. "Martha," he said as he reached the door, "people like Emily don't fear confrontation. They fear exposure. And we're about to shine a very bright light." After he left, I walked to the dining table and placed my hands flat on the wood. The house wasn't silent anymore, not with dread, but with direction. For the first time since all this began, I didn't feel like a woman being pushed into a corner. I felt like a woman taking her first step forward. And I knew one thing very clearly. If Emily wanted a war, she had just picked the wrong generation. After Carlos left, I didn't sit down. I didn't rest. I didn't let the quiet settle the way it used to. Instead, I walked through my house with a sense of purpose so steady it almost startled me. Every step felt anchored, deliberate, like the ground itself had firmed beneath my feet. I gathered everything I could think of: folders, binders, envelopes stuffed with old paperwork I had kept out of habit, not foresight, but now that habit felt like intuition. I placed everything on the dining table and sorted through it slowly, letting the memories attached to each document wash over me and then pass. No tears, no hesitation, just clarity. As I worked, the sunlight shifted across the hardwood floor, turning from warm yellow to a softer, late-afternoon gold. Time was moving, but for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I welcomed it. Every minute was bringing me closer to something I hadn't felt in years: control. When the phone rang, I expected it to be Carlos again, but the voice on the other end was one I recognized instantly. "Baby, you all right?" Mrs. Evans asked. "I'm fine," I said, and I meant it. "I know that APS visit rattled you," she said gently, but I also know you're stronger than anything they try." Her confidence steadied me. It was strange how a few simple words from someone who truly sees you can stitch together all the pieces you thought were permanently cracked. "I'm building the case," I told her. "Carlos said we need proof. Real proof." "Then let me help," she replied without hesitation. "I've got eyes, I've got memory, and I'm not afraid to speak truth." Those words settled into my chest like a warm ember. "I'll come by in an hour," she added. "Let me finish my cornbread. I'm not stepping into a legal battle hungry." Despite everything, I laughed. Really laughed. The first real laugh I'd allowed myself since this nightmare began. While I waited for her, I moved to the hallway closet and pulled out a small fireproof safe I hadn't opened since James passed. Inside were old insurance papers, property documents, and a folder I had forgotten existed. When I opened it, the edges of the papers were yellowed slightly, but the ink was clear. Life insurance payout, pension details, receipts from the years I paid for Michael's college textbooks, letters from James reminding me to always protect what you earned. I paused on that line, always protect what you earned. I whispered it under my breath, letting the strength of those words settle around me like a cloak. When Mrs. Evans arrived, she didn't bother knocking. She stepped inside carrying the cornbread wrapped in a towel and a notebook tucked under one arm. "We're going to do this properly," she said. "No woman fights alone on my street." We sat at the table, her presence filling the room with the kind of warmth you only get from a woman who has lived long enough to know when silence is dangerous and when truth can save you. "Start with facts," she instructed. "Nothing emotional, just truth." So we did. One page at a time, I wrote down every incident. Not dramatic, not exaggerated, just what happened. Dates, locations, witnesses, words said out loud, behaviors repeated again and again. Mrs. Evans added details I had missed. She remembered tone, context, even facial expressions. "She said you were too slow getting out of the car last Easter," she reminded me, "and she told Michael she was worried about your mobility." "Yes," I said quietly. "She did." "And when she asked why you double-checked your purse last month, she whispered to her mother that you were showing signs." I felt heat rise under my skin, but not shame, recognition. She had been building this narrative long before the scarf, long before the APS visit. It wasn't sudden. It wasn't impulsive. It was intentional. We wrote everything down, and with each line the story shifted, not in content, but in clarity. What had felt like scattered moments now aligned into a pattern of manipulation, erosion, control disguised as care. Mrs. Evans closed the notebook gently. "There," she said, "that's the truth spoken plain." We moved on to the next step, recording witness statements. She offered to speak to Carlos directly and provide her account. Then she listed other neighbors who had seen and heard things over the years. People I hadn't realized were paying attention. "You'd be surprised how many folks see through that girl," she said. "Just because people keep quiet doesn't mean they're blind." Her words settled deep. While she helped me organize the piles of paperwork, I prepared copies. 3 sets of everything, exactly how Carlos had taught me back when I handled James's estate. My hands moved with a precision I didn't know I still possessed. Each click of the stapler, each folder label, each paper added to the stack felt like laying down another brick in the foundation of my defense. By the time the sun dipped lower in the sky, stretching long shadows across the table, we had built something real: evidence, testimony, memory, truth. "That's enough for today," Mrs. Evans said, pressing the cornbread into my hands. "Eat, rest. Tomorrow, you keep going." I walked her to the door. Before she left, she turned to me with a look so earnest it rooted me to the spot. "Martha," she said softly, "people like Emily rely on women like you feeling alone, but you're not alone. Not now, not ever again." When she left, I stood in the doorway for a long breath, letting her words settle over me like the evening air. The quiet didn't feel threatening anymore. It felt steady, purposeful. I went back to the dining table, placed the notebook she'd given me beside the evidence stacks, and ran my fingertips over the cover. Then I opened it and wrote a single sentence. I am not the story she tells. And as the ink seeped into the paper, I felt something shift. Not loudly, not dramatically, but firmly. The way earth shifts before roots take hold. This wasn't just gathering evidence. It wasn't just preparing for a battle. It was reclaiming my reality, piece by piece, word by word, truth by truth. And for the first time since all this began, I felt the ground beneath me, solid, unwavering mine. The next day began with a quiet tension in the air, the kind that makes the sunlight feel sharper, the walls more alert, the smallest sound more distinct. I woke early, long before the alarm, and moved through the house with an ease I didn't recognize at first. Then I understood. This wasn't the heaviness of fear anymore. It was the stillness before a shift. Carlos texted just before noon. They'll strike publicly soon. Be prepared. I didn't have to ask what he meant. Emily wasn't satisfied with silent tactics. She wanted spectacle, validation, an audience to applaud her narrative, and I knew exactly where she'd stage it. That afternoon, I received a message from Michael. Family meeting at the Sanders house tonight. Emily wants everyone there. Says it's important. Important. Of course she did. I replied simply, I'll be there. Hours passed, slow but steady. I gathered the folders Carlos helped me prepare, the notebook Mrs. Evans encouraged me to fill, the medical appointment confirmation he insisted I schedule for the next morning. I didn't tremble. I didn't waver. Everything inside me was aligned. When evening arrived, I dressed simply. Dark slacks, soft cream blouse, hair pulled back neatly. Nothing dramatic, nothing confrontational, just dignity. The kind she never expected. The Sanders house buzzed with tension the moment I walked in. Too many people, too much forced small talk, the fake warmth of a social gathering where everyone knows the real event hasn't started yet. Emily's parents hovered near the kitchen island, whispering. A few aunts and cousins stood together holding glasses, eyes sliding toward me, then away, then toward Emily. Neutral faces trying to read which direction the wind would blow. Michael stood near the fireplace, shifting his weight from one foot to another, clearly anxious. And Emily, she was in her element. Crisp blouse, hair perfectly curled, smile smooth as porcelain. She greeted people with soft touches on the arm, lowered voice, strategic glances. She didn't greet me. She didn't have to. The room divided naturally, those who believed her side of the story and those who were waiting for whichever side felt safer. After a few minutes of polite noise, Emily stepped toward the center of the room and clapped her hands lightly. Everyone, thank you for coming. We need to talk about something serious. There it was, her stage. She looked around slowly, ensuring every eye was on her. We're concerned about Martha, she said, voice lowered just enough to sound compassionate. She's been acting, confused, forgetful, erratic. The words hit the room like tiny darts, sharp, deliberate, designed to puncture sympathy. A murmur spread. People glanced at one another. Emily continued, she's making sudden financial decisions, removing Michael from accounts, canceling arrangements she's always relied on. We're worried she might be compromised. It happens at her age. Her age. A phrase dipped in poison. I said nothing. Not yet. She placed a hand on her chest, an actress preparing for her monologue. Michael and I just want what's best for her safety, and for Lily's safety, too. The implication hung in the air like smoke. Michael finally stepped forward, clearly uncomfortable. Mom, maybe we can talk about the changes you've been making. People are concerned. I let the silence linger for a moment, not long enough to seem defensive, but long enough to let their assumptions show their true shape. Then I set my folder gently on the table beside me. Are you finished? I asked Emily quietly. She blinked, thrown off by the steadiness in my voice. I just want everyone to understand." "No," I said, still calm. "You want everyone to believe." The room shifted. Attention snapped toward me. "If you truly cared about my safety," I continued, "you wouldn't have humiliated me in front of these same people 3 days ago." Her face stiffened. "I didn't humiliate you. I was joking. You're being too sensitive." "That joke involved you throwing my gift into the trash and calling it junk." A wave of whispers rippled through the room. She lifted her chin. "You're twisting it. You misunderstood the tone." I opened my folder. "Then let's talk tone." I handed the first page to the nearest family member. His eyes scanned the words. He passed it to the next, and the next. "What is this?" Emily demanded. "Notes," I said. "Documented comments, behaviors, and incidents spanning the last 3 years. Dates, locations, witnesses." Her eyes darted nervously as the pages moved through the room. I reached for another set of papers. "These are the automatic payments I've been covering for your household. Rent deposit, utility bills, preschool fees." Michael's eyes widened. "And here," I added, laying down another folder, "is a record of your outstanding credit card debt. The one you planned to cover by convincing my son I was financially incompetent and needed supervision." Emily gasped, more from shock that I knew than from guilt. "And this," I said, holding up the APS notice, "is the false report you filed yesterday afternoon." The room froze. "That's not, you can't," Emily sputtered, but I wasn't done. Not even close. I walked slowly toward the center of the room, letting the weight of my words fall evenly without emotion. "If you were genuinely concerned about my mental health, you wouldn't have tried to discredit me behind closed doors. You wouldn't have whispered lies to your husband. You wouldn't have built a narrative around my supposed confusion." I let my gaze sweep across the group. "And you certainly wouldn't have made a falsified report to Adult Protective Services claiming I was unstable." Emily's face drained of color. Michael looked like he couldn't breathe. I took a step closer. But the APS worker cleared me. Fully competent, fully capable, nothing wrong, which means the report wasn't concern. I paused, letting truth settle like a stone. It was strategy. A few gasps sounded. Emily shook her head violently. "You're making me sound like a monster." I met her eyes, calm, steady, unshaken. "No, Emily, I'm letting everyone see the one you've already become." She opened her mouth, but no words came out. Michael finally spoke, voice breaking. "Emily, is this true?" She couldn't answer. I reached for the final document in my folder, the new will, updated, witnessed, notarized. "I protected myself," I said gently, "because you forced me to." Emily's breath hitched when she saw her name wasn't on it. Michael's either. The room fell utterly silent. No yelling, no screaming. Just the weight of consequences settling over everything she had built. I closed the folder softly. "This isn't revenge," I said. "It's boundaries, something I should have set a long time ago." And for the first time in 3 years, maybe longer, Emily didn't have a single word to throw back. The truth had spoken louder than her performance ever could. The room stayed frozen long after I closed the folder. It was the kind of silence that doesn't just fill a space, it rearranges it. People shifted uncomfortably, glancing at one another, unsure where to stand now that the truth had taken its place in the center of the room, undeniable and unmoving. Emily's eyes darted around, searching for an ally, a lifeline, anyone who might still believe the story she had crafted with such precision. But even her parents looked shaken. Her mother pressed a trembling hand to her mouth while her father's face drained of color, his posture collapsing into something small and unfamiliar. Every carefully built facade Emily had maintained cracked in the space of a breath. "This isn't, she's twisting everything." Emily stammered, her voice thinner than I had ever heard it. But the problem wasn't my words. It was the facts, written, witnessed, documented. Emily had never imagined I would gather proof. She thought I was too old, too soft, too eager to keep the peace. She never realized silence isn't stupidity. It's strategy. The strategy of people who've survived too much to waste breath defending themselves to the wrong audience. Michael stepped forward, his face pale, eyes unfocused. Emily. Why would you call APS? Why would you lie? Mom isn't... He stopped, realizing he didn't even know how to finish that sentence. He had been so conditioned to trust Emily's interpretation of me that he never learned to see me clearly on his own. Emily reached for him. Michael, listen to me. She's manipulating this whole... Her voice cracked mid-sentence as he took a step back. That single step, small, quiet, barely a movement, struck her like a blow. The room felt it. I felt it. It was the first time in years Michael had moved away from her instead of toward her. She blinked rapidly, panic blooming across her face. Michael, baby, don't do this. She's your mother, but she's exaggerating. You know how she gets. You know she's not the one lying, he said softly. The air seemed to collapse around us. Emily stumbled, as if the room had suddenly tilted, and grabbed the back of a chair to steady herself. I did everything for this family, she whispered, but the words fell flat. They didn't land. They didn't convince. They evaporated the moment they left her lips. Her performance was unraveling. When someone builds a narrative on half-truths and manipulation, they rely on one thing, no one ever challenging them publicly. Now, under the weight of dozens of watching eyes, her mask slipped, not dramatically, quietly, and quiet unraveling is the most devastating kind. Her father cleared his throat. Emily, did you really file a false report? I was trying to help, she insisted desperately. You all know how she is. But no one nodded. Her mother looked at me with something like shame. We should have asked you directly, she murmured. I didn't respond. Forgiveness wasn't the purpose of tonight. Emily's face twisted. You're all ridiculous. You're taking her side. She's manipulating you. She's playing the victim. But the more she spoke, the more her voice frayed, the more her certainty cracked, the more obvious it became. The only story falling apart was hers. And then, as if the universe wanted to seal the moment, her phone buzzed loudly. She flinched and grabbed it. She stared at the screen, color draining faster than before. Michael leaned closer. What is it? Her hand shook. Our credit card. It got declined. A spark of understanding flickered in the room. Consequences had begun. Michael frowned. Declined? For what? For the catering deposit, she whispered, voice shrill with disbelief. I tried again and, oh my God, Michael, it got locked. The account got locked. She looked up at me, horror dawning in her eyes as the truth finally hit her. I had removed myself from their financial trap, and the crutch she had leaned on, quietly, consistently, selfishly, was gone. That's impossible, she said, though the trembling in her voice betrayed every lie she'd ever told. Fix it. Fix it. Michael turned to me, but this time not with entitlement, with shame. Mom, I didn't know she'd been using your... I never asked. I raised a hand gently. Michael, I don't need your explanation. I needed my boundaries. Emily spun toward him. You knew we needed help. You said it yourself. Your job wasn't enough. The bills kept coming, the rent. Michael flinched. Emily, not here. Yes, here, she snapped, her voice cracking under the weight of her unraveling control. Because you depend on her. We both do. She owes us. The room gasped as the final truth landed, raw, ugly, unmistakable. There it was. Not concern, not love, not misunderstanding, entitlement, open, exposed, undeniable. I stepped forward, not loud, not angry, just steady. I owe you nothing. Emily shook her head like she didn't understand the sentence, like it was a language she'd never learned. You're ruining us." "No," I said softly. "I stopped letting you use me." Her breath hitched. "You can't do this." "I already did." She looked at the room, begging for someone, anyone, to rescue her. But they all stayed silent. Because once truth is spoken plainly, it's hard to unhear it. And then, almost in slow motion, Emily's shoulders dropped. Her posture collapsed inward. The realization finally pierced her. The house, the future she imagined, the control she thought she held, all of it had been built on assumptions about me, assumptions that had just been shattered. Michael's voice broke the silence. "Emily, we need to go." She stared at him, stunned. "Michael?" He didn't lift her bags. He didn't comfort her. He didn't defend her. He simply looked at me, his mother, with a mixture of regret and awakening, then took Lily's hand and guided her toward the door. Emily followed slowly, like a woman walking out of a life she no longer recognized. At the doorway, she whispered one last time, "You'll regret this." I met her eyes, unshaken. I already spent years regretting the things I let slide. She had no comeback, just silence. When the door closed behind them, a deep, settling calm filled the room. Not triumph, just release. The price of their deceit had finally begun. When the door closed behind them, the quiet didn't feel heavy the way it had before. It didn't echo with loneliness or ache with memories. For the first time in years, the silence inside my home felt like mine, uncluttered, unapologetic, rooted. I stood there for a long moment, hand still resting on the doorknob, letting the shift inside me settle fully into place. The storm had passed, not because they left, but because I had finally stepped out of it. I walked slowly back to the dining table where the folders still lay, the papers now neatly stacked instead of scattered, the notebook open to the last sentence I had written. The ink had dried, but the conviction behind the words still pulsed like a quiet heartbeat. I am not the story she tells. I closed the notebook gently, feeling more anchored than I had in years. I moved through the house, not to clean, not to escape my thoughts, but simply to take in the space as if seeing it with new eyes. And in a way, I was. Every photo, every piece of furniture, every quiet corner had been carrying so much unspoken tension for so long. Now all that weight had lifted, revealing a life I had almost forgotten I built with my own hands. The sun outside had faded into the soft blue of early evening, the kind of color that makes the world feel slow and steady. I stepped onto the porch, letting the evening air brush against my skin. For a moment, I just breathed, not because I needed to calm myself, but because breathing suddenly felt simple again. My phone buzzed. Carlos. "You held your ground," he texted. "Rest tonight. Tomorrow we finish this." I typed back, "Thank you for everything." His reply was immediate. "You did the hard part. I'll see you at 10. I put the phone away and stayed outside for a while longer. The crickets were starting their nightly chorus, a familiar, soothing rhythm. It was strange how the world kept moving even when your own life felt like it had just shifted on its axis. But maybe that was the point. Life moves, and it invites you to move with it. When I finally went back inside, I didn't feel the old need to brace myself. I made a cup of chamomile tea, turned on the small lamp by the couch, and curled up beneath a soft throw blanket James had bought me years ago. It still smelled faintly of lavender. I closed my eyes, letting the warmth spread through me, and for the first time in a very long time, I felt safe. Not safe because nothing bad could happen. Safe because I trusted myself to face it when it did. The next morning, I met Carlos at the medical center for my cognitive assessment. The doctor conducting it was kind but professional, careful not to patronize me. I answered every question thoroughly. I solved every memory prompt. I completed every task with a clarity even I hadn't realized I still possessed. At the end, the doctor smiled and handed me the signed evaluation. "Sharp as ever," he said. I took the paper with steady hands. "Thank you, doctor." Carlos grinned as soon as we stepped outside. "She has no clue what's coming." But this time, I didn't feel satisfaction. Not revenge, not triumph, just closure. We spent the next 2 weeks wrapping up everything. Legal protections, notarizations, statements from neighbors, and copies of every document tucked into a safe place. Carlos handled the logistics with the precision of a surgeon, but he always paused to let me breathe, to let me choose, to let me lead. It reminded me that taking back control wasn't a one-time moment. It was a process. And day by day, something unexpected happened. I started to build a life again, not a life shaped by fear or silence or the need to belong to people who didn't value me, but a life shaped by choice. I signed up for a watercolor class at the community center. The first day, my hands trembled slightly, not from nerves, but from the realization that I was stepping into something new at an age when most people settle into routine. The instructor, a woman with wild silver curls and paint on her jeans, greeted me with a smile that felt like sunlight. "You're here to make something beautiful," she said. "Not perfect, just beautiful." I let those words wash over me. On Saturdays, I joined a gardening club, a small group of older women who spoke softly about seedlings and loudly about their grandchildren. They welcomed me without question, without hesitation. I planted herbs and lilies and marigolds, and watching them grow rooted something deeper inside me. I started taking long walks again, the ones James and I used to take on cool mornings. I'd forgotten how much I missed the sound of my own steps on pavement, the way trees sway when you're not rushing past them, the quiet thoughts that rise only when you finally give yourself space to hear them. I even found myself laughing more, not politely, not cautiously, freely. The evening I wrote that final sentence in my notebook, the one that felt like both a closing and an opening, I didn't expect anything more to rise inside me. I thought I had reached the end. The quiet ending a woman earns after walking through storms she never asked for. But healing is strange. It doesn't arrive as a finish line. It arrives as a doorway. And as the weeks passed in my new home by the lake, that doorway kept widening in ways I didn't anticipate. Small things began to feel like small miracles. The sound of a kettle whistling, a breeze moving through the curtains, the warm weight of a book in my hands, the laughter of the new friends I'd made in my art class. One morning, I opened my front door to find a pot of yellow mums sitting on my porch. No note, no explanation, just quiet kindness. Mrs. Evans had a way of giving things without drawing attention, and I smiled knowing she had probably placed them there before sunrise, letting the flowers speak for her. I carried them inside and set them by the window overlooking the lake. As I stepped back, I felt a strange, full ache in my chest. Not pain, not sadness, but something deeper. Gratitude, maybe. Or the realization that after everything had been taken, twisted, touched by betrayal, my heart had found a way to stay open. I wasn't naive anymore, but I wasn't closed. I had become something stronger, guarded, but generous. The kind of woman who doesn't let herself be used, but still believes in the good that remains. In those months, I found a rhythm that finally felt like mine. I volunteered twice a week at the community library, reading stories to children in the afternoons. Their laughter filled the small, colorful room, and every time a child leaned against my arm or handed me a book with eager eyes, I felt the world soften in a way I thought I had lost forever. I painted more, too. At first, my brushstrokes were hesitant, but as time passed, they grew bolder, fuller. My instructor once paused behind me and said, "There you are. I can see you in these colors now." And I realized she was right. My paintings had become a reflection of the steadiness I'd built, the boundaries I'd claimed, the life I had allowed myself to step into. Even the way I moved through the world changed. I walked with my shoulders back, my steps unhurried, my voice steady in conversations where I once might have stayed quiet. People who met me for the first time often assumed I had always been this way, poised, calm, rooted. They didn't know the years it took to get here, the pages of pain and rediscovery written beneath the surface. But I knew, and that was enough. Michael visited more often now, not every day, not excessively, but consistently. He didn't come with heavy apologies or forced explanations. He came with honesty, which mattered more. He helped fix a wobbly shelf one weekend, brought me a new cookbook the next, and sometimes we just sat on the porch watching the sunset in comfortable silence. One evening, he turned to me and said, "I'm trying, Mom." "I know," I replied softly. "Trying is how we grow." He looked out at the lake again. I miss the way things used to be, before everything got so complicated. I rested a hand on his arm. Life gets complicated when truth is ignored too long, but we're not ignoring it anymore. That's what matters now. He nodded slowly, taking it in, letting it settle the way truth does when it's finally spoken aloud. Emily never came, and to my surprise, I didn't feel the absence. Not because she didn't matter, but because her presence had been built on a version of me that no longer existed. You can't miss something that was never real to begin with. One Saturday morning, as I walked through the small farmer's market by the lake, I saw an older woman struggling to carry 2 heavy bags. I helped her instinctively. She smiled up at me, breathless but grateful. "You remind me of my sister," she said, "strong, quiet but strong." It was the second time in months someone had used that word, strong. For years, I had mistaken quietness for strength. I thought being easy, agreeable, endlessly forgiving made me loving. But now I understood. True strength isn't in silence. It's in choosing when to speak, when to walk away, when to save yourself. Back home, I added a final entry in my notebook, the one Mrs. Evans had given me, the one that now held the arc of everything I had survived. I am 64 years old, and I finally learned that the love I give loses all meaning when I stop giving it to myself. I closed the notebook and placed it gently beside the vase of yellow mums. The sunlight caught the petals, turning them into tiny flames of gold, and for a moment, my entire house felt warm, alive, awake. Then something unexpected happened. I felt compelled to speak, not to myself, not into the room, but outward, as if addressing someone standing right in front of me. Not Emily, not Michael, not even James, but someone like me. Some woman out there sitting in her own quiet storm. And so I said aloud, "Your pain is real, but so is your power, and you deserve a life that doesn't shrink you." The words hung gently in the air, soft and steady. Then I added, "And if anyone treats your love like cheap junk, let them watch what happens when you finally decide you're worth more." The house held that truth without trembling. Later that evening, as the sun sank low and painted the lake in silver-orange streaks, I stepped outside and let the air fill my lungs, not because I needed recovery, because I had become whole. And now, dear listener, whoever you are, wherever you're sitting, I leave you with the same question I asked myself when everything began. If someone made you small for years, what would your life look like if you finally stood up? Think about it. Then answer with your actions. Not for them, for you.